Hey, Missy, do you hear me?
I do. Hi.
Excellent. Welcome.
Oh, it's so good. I can see the room too. That's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, at least one side of it. I mean,
Yeah, that's helpful though.
yep. You're missing future and past OSU people on the other side of the room. This is Missy Beers. She's the head of the Bookends program, which she'll be talking a little bit about today. And long time, much revered and valued colleague on a lot of different fronts.
Co-conspirator comes
Yes.
as a
Oh,
word that comes to
yes.
mind. Partner in crime.
Well, people are starting to. We just had lunch in the first plenary.
How was it?
That was good. It was good. Yeah, Kathy Lancy. Hey, you see Amanda.
Hey.
Yeah, Art Young, who was a big person in WAC here at Clemson for a while. Yeah. Hey.
Just wanted to say hello, and I hope you'll have a great session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Loved your session yesterday. I couldn't stay for the whole thing, but it was awesome.
Oh, great. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it was really good.
We have a lot of fun together as a group doing that work.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk more about it, obviously, where to find us.
I know. Well, plan to hear from me then.
Yeah. It was kind of funny too. It was towards the end. I think I started mentioning you. Oh, because we were talking about assessment. And, I said, my colleague, Missy Beers, will probably be, screaming with delight talking about assessment because she's really, I forget exactly what I was talking about related to assessment. Oh, it was like connecting students to programmatic assessment and involving them in it and showing it with them and using it as a tool for learning.
Yes.
To deal with that tension, because we were kind of talking about the tension between, institutional and classroom learning and teaching and learning development, and you have the answer to that as far as I'm concerned.
I have an answer to
that.
That's important.
Yep. But yeah, and the other thing, it was too, we ended with, when we were talking about transparency in learning and teaching, the last example was from psychology. And for a second, I'm like, oh, it was from something completely different. It was from Winklemas, an example from Winklemas's stuff. But we were using stuff from, the survey I did several years ago. And I'm like, we haven't done one yet where the actual instructor or somebody connected to the department were actually involved, which is sort of my slight fear. Oh, looks like Alan's here. But so I'm like, that's why I texted you. It's like, lol, psych example.
That's why.
Well, have a great set. I'm going to check out some ungrading stuff, but it was good to see you, Missy.
Good to see you. See you soon. Hey, Alan.
Hey, Alan.
Now my computer will allow you to see me.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining. I am
here.
going to share screen. We have our PowerPoint set to go.
Awesome. I'm glad you liked my metaphor.
I love it. I'm gonna, just so you know, I'm gonna start briefly from my original metaphor, but I'm gonna talk about how your metaphor is better than the metaphors that I was I had been thinking about, and also sort of sets up, how we're thinking about, our collaborations and that kind of thing, and thinking strategically and all of that. So yeah, thank you for the work getting that done.
Well, it's my favorite thing to do, so it was hardly work, but
That's fine. I can handle. I can walk. I think having well, I'm here to sort of guide, and I'll be the eyes and ears for Missy and and Alan. So.
Everything else look good?
Let's see.
Because she was in charge. Yes, yeah. She retired, she was the procurement person. No, it was.
And we can then present whenever you want. I can go to section.
Yeah, she's still doing the photo, yeah. Yeah. Oh, all right, yeah. No, it's me, it's my problem, my problem. I don't say. Yeah. It's me.
All right, it's about 1:30, so I think I'll get started. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Chris Mannion. I'm the Writing Across the Curriculum Coordinator at the Center for the Study and Teaching of Writing at Ohio State. I'm joined by two of my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Melissa Missy Beers, who currently is the Senior Director of a core part of our new general education curriculum that we'll be talking about, the General Education Bookends. But for many, many years before that, she was an instructor in the Department of Psychology, and for 16 years was a course director for Intro to Psychology, as well as their second level writing course in the curriculum. So one thing that I'm going to be talking about is, some of these long histories and the collaborations that have emerged from that. And Missy was a core part of that for over a decade. We've had these conversations. But for even longer than that, Dr. Alan Kalish, who's currently the Assistant Vice Provost of undergraduate education, whose work primarily focuses on general education, and particularly the assessment of general education, and has kind of guided Ohio State in many ways through the process of developing the new curriculum, has been a core part of that. But for 18 years before that, he was the director of Ohio State's Teaching and Learning Center, which at its height was called University Center for the Advancement of Teaching. So he too has been kind of a core part of the conversation about teaching at Ohio State for decades. So I want to start with a little bit of an origin story about my own work in WAC and my initial perceptions of this, and kind of start with as we were talking about this, were some bad metaphors that didn't reflect what was actually happening on the ground at Ohio State. And then sort of talk about a metaphor for the kind of work we've been doing over the past time, working together, which has developed into something that's really exciting at Ohio State. So I started in my position 18 years ago, kind of very, very excited. My position was created to be part of the conversation about writing in general education. There was a big report with recommendations for writing across the curriculum at Ohio State. And I was very excited. 2006, I came to Clemson for my first IWAC. And I left sort of feeling like I was going to take Ohio State by storm and, make massive changes in writing at Ohio State. And of course, I was disabused of that, especially over time. And there were times over many, many years where I sort of felt that I was wandering in the wilderness, or alternately trying to throw things against the wall to see whether they stuck. But what has happened over the past couple of years is that I feel like, the doors have blown open. We have lots of really exciting opportunities that, are before us, that I'm very excited to collaborate. So our two goals for today is to share some information about what's happening, what the new structure of general education at Ohio State is starting to look at. Missy in particular is going to be talking about the bookend curriculum, and Alan's going to kind of give us a map of the new curriculum and kind of talk about the role of writing in that curriculum. And then I want to say some words about looking back at, to give myself maybe a little bit more credit for, the strategic approach to developing a way of looking at how WAC programs can work in general education, and to build strategic collaborations like the ones that we've built over decades. And Missy's metaphor that she suggested, I think, is a lot more productive. Thinking about sowing seeds. So we, have small seeds that we place on the ground, and it feels like we're just simply scattering them, and that there's no rhyme or reason to what we're doing. And it takes a while for those seeds to germinate. And as they germinate, we only see a little part of the plant coming up. And you get very impatient as you see these seedlings begin to sprout up. And it takes quite a while to do that. But if you look underneath, and I'm going to move your heads, by the way, so they can see the image that Missy shared. Here on the far right of our triptych, we see the roots, that the roots are often growing much deeper than you can see under the soil. And that was something over the years that it took me a long time to recognize that things wouldn't come back to me. The work that was happening, back in the departments or with the instructors that we worked with, and the connections that we were making, took a long time to develop. And one thing that Missy pointed out as she was sort of thinking through this metaphor and looking up and thinking about her gardening, I think that's where a lot of this, she's been doing a lot of gardening at home, that plants communicate through their root systems often, and it takes a long time for them to develop. It helps the plants really become sturdy. And what I feel like at this point, the tree is still young, but it appears to be potentially bearing some fruit. So I'm excited to kind of talk about that. So I'm going to be turning things over to Alan in a minute. And incidentally, I have control over the PowerPoint. So whenever you want to switch slides, let me know and I'll be happy to do that. So I turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Alan Kalish.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So we rolled out a new general education curriculum for all Ohio State students, starting with those who matriculated in this past fall. The prior program had been developed in 1988. So it was older than almost all of our students and some of our faculty, and it was time. And the intention was like this image of the oval, which is the center of our campus, with all of these wonderful pathways that can take you directly from any building with a disciplinary department in it to any other. But in fact, and we thought that we had built that kind of structure. But when we talked to students and looked at it, in fact, what we had is in the next slide. And that is, it was a jigsaw puzzle that no one knew what the picture looked like. And so students would pick up classes and try and put them together with no clue as to what the end state was supposed to be. And they would be struggling with that, often enrolling in classes because of the time of day that they met, and filling in. And it was a strict distribution model where you had 14 categories and students had to take at least one class in each of the 14 categories and then make sense of it themselves without very much help from us. So in winter of 2016-17, our University Senate's Council on Academic Affairs convened a committee and charged us with reviewing and revising our general education. And so the next slide shows that we had to reimagine it. And the first thing we did, and this was my former boss, the vice provost for academic programs, had the great idea that we really needed to listen to everybody around campus and find out what people thought, even the cats. Yeah. He's always here with Zoom. Anyway, so we did listening sessions for about 7 months, for a semester and a bit more. Had more than 1,000 individuals, faculty, staff, students, other stakeholders, and asked them what was working, what did they not want to see disappear from a new gen ed, in the current gen ed, that they wanted to keep, what were they certain they wanted to get rid of, and what would they like to see that they had never seen before. And in the next slide, we can see what the main issues were that we came up with. The first is that students really didn't understand what the purpose of the GE is. And that's pretty universal, that, when a student gets to college, they don't know what we're trying to do. And we weren't telling them. And so we really decided that we needed to build in something for that. The next issue was that it was too large. We had about 45 credits, 14 minimum enrollments for students in general education before they really got to their majors, although there was some overlap in many of the majors. And we have 14 colleges that offer undergraduate degrees at Ohio State. Now, Arts and Sciences is the biggest one and has 40 plus departments, but every college that offers an undergraduate degree had a slightly different system of general education. And in fact, arts and sciences had separate ones for bachelors of arts and bachelor of science. And that made transfer, shifting majors for students, very difficult in some cases. The other issue is that it was too shallow, that it was all introductory classes. And because it was strict distribution, students could start at any point, but that meant that each class was always at the most basic level possible. And very often what that meant was it was a survey. We looked at everything we could in a discipline rather than trying to delve into the really thorny, interesting problems that there are in the world. So given those, we came up with 3 critical process elements that we wanted to make sure happened in the new gen ed. And that's the next slide. So we wanted to make sure that it was integrated, that the puzzle pieces actually fit together, and that students could understand and build puzzles that had reasonable pictures and not just random pieces, that it was inclusive across the disciplines, across all of our student populations, and for everybody teaching in it, and that it was iterative, that students didn't just learn something in one class and then forget about it forever, that they would come back to things and see how they were doing it. And we also used these process elements as we were doing the design. We tried to bring together everything that everybody told us. We tried to listen to as many people as we could. And then we came up with plans, put them out there, got feedback on them, made changes, and came back. So it took a few years to actually come up with a plan. And then it took a few more years to move it politically through the curricular process at our university. When you're the size of Ohio State, nothing changes quickly. Most of us don't, but the bigger you are, the slower the turn is. The next slide shows us the structure of what we did come up with. So we have at the bottom our foundations. And this image should look like a building with a roof on it so that you can see that the bottom is the foundation. Those 7 courses are the Ohio transfer module. So we are required by our state to have a chunk of coursework that we will accept from any other public institution and that we offer to every other public institution that are reasonably close to each other, so that if students have taken courses in those or have taken all of those courses, that it makes sense to them to do that. We actually only had 6. The diversity course, the race, ethnicity, and gender diversity, is new. Diversity used to be an add-on in some other discipline, any other discipline. And we decided this time that it really needed to be its own thing, and it needed to be more deep than just something added to another course. So we've developed those courses new. And that has actually changed. And in the last 3 years, the state of Ohio State Board of Higher Education has accepted that as part of the transfer module. So that's the foundations. In order to make it deeper, because as I said, it was too shallow, we have upper division coursework as well. The themes, education for citizenship, well, in Latin, is the motto of our university as a land grant. So citizenship for a diverse and just world is a theme that every student must take. And then each student gets to choose one of these other themes. And these are all issues, questions, concerns that require more than one perspective, more than one disciplinary lens to really get a hold of and to work on. And so students are required to either take 2 classes from 2 different disciplines in each of the themes that they're taking, or they can take 1 class. It's a 4-credit-hour class that includes an integrative pedagogy. That is one of a subset of the high impact practices that George Koo and the folks at Indiana have been working on and came up with over the past few decades. So service learning, undergraduate research, global and intercultural learning, that is education abroad or by computer, and so on, for those. And then to address the issue that students didn't understand what they were doing and why they were doing it, we have the two pillars on the outside, the launch seminar and the reflection seminar, which are our bookends, which Missy will talk about in a moment. In addition to these things, we have what we call embedded literacies. So there were elements that we really wanted every student to engage with and learn about that we didn't have room for in the number of enrollments that we were willing to allow for the gen ed, and that seemed like they were highly divergent and more linked to the disciplinary majors than they were necessarily generic. So we have embedded literacies for advanced writing, so writing in the major as opposed to writing across the curriculum in some ways. Technological literacy, that is understanding the place of technology and shifting technologies in their major field, and data analysis. And those are embedded in every major, and every major has to come up with a way to address the learning outcomes, the shared learning outcomes for those. So that's really the structure that we came up with over the last 6 years and put into place. And now I'll pass it to Missy to get a little more depth on those bookends.
Thank you, Alan. And hey, everybody, I can see a few of you in there, but I think there's some more on the other side of the room I can't see, but hello to everyone. And thanks for letting us be here with you today. Thanks, Chris, for being there in the room so we can join you. I love this conference. I wish I could be there in person, but it's so great to have this option to be able to join remotely. As Chris said, we've sort of been partners, collaborators, co-conspirators, and I think I'm sort of like the chief troublemaker, on our campus. I love to do new things. I love to try new things, and this is a big new thing. So, in the process of planning the new gen ed, I had previously taught intro psych and directed intro psych, which was a big program. It was one of the biggest gen ed programs. At one point, we served 8,000 students a year. I worked with a team that taught the course. It was primarily graduate students, and they were about sometimes 40 students, graduate students teaching the course each year. So the size and scale was not intimidating, but the focus of these courses was so exciting and so new. So I'm really excited to share with you this really unique and important part of the gen ed as a whole. So, as you know, things move slowly. I think Alan and I and others on a committee, we spent about 2 years just writing the learning objectives for the new gen ed. And these bookends were in development over a really long period of time. But they were really designed to help students to answer those questions. Why do I have to take this class? Why do we need it? This gen ed seems pointless. Why do I have to do these things? And so we have this launch seminar where students take this 1 credit hour pass-fail course in their first 3 semesters. And then before graduation, they will take the second bookend, the reflection seminar. I have another Buckeye that pops up when we advance the screen just a little bit. Yeah. So we have these 2 bookends, these 2 1 credit hour courses. We're in the process of also developing a special version of these courses for transfer students, as opposed to new first year students, that will combine sort of both elements of the launch and reflection seminar. But these are 2 new courses that every single student at Ohio State will take as part of the gen ed. It's a big culture shift, but it's been very exciting here in our first year. So Chris, can you take me to the next slide, please? So again, these courses are sort of the framework, or on either side of the student experience. The gen ed courses that you saw in the previous slide and that Alan talked about, those are the books on the shelf in between, along with students' experience in their major program, co-curricular experiences and such. But these courses frame the student experience. Go ahead to the next one. Thank you. The launch seminar has 3 primary goals. As we mentioned first, help students understand the purpose of the gen ed in their education, for them to develop not only this understanding of what it is, but for them to have a sense of autonomy and self-efficacy, to find the courses that will best serve them and support their interests. A secondary goal, I mean, if you're going to do a class like this, right, a secondary goal, if you have this opportunity, is to support students, all students, in developing the kinds of academic skills and habits that they need to be successful, right? Habits of mind, ways of thinking about their education, ways of thinking about their new environment and how to approach their education. And then we ask students and encourage them to think about themselves as a scholar, understand what scholarship is, scholarship as a conversation that they're going to have in different disciplines as they engage in this interdisciplinary education that we call gen ed. We ask them to think about and reflect on who they are, their academic identity, and to make a plan for the kinds of things they want to do to develop that identity. Again, not just in their major, in terms of the courses that they want to take, the gen ed courses they want to take, the co-curricular experiences that they may have, professional experiences. And so the launch seminar, again, it's a lot packed into 1 credit hour, but we want to set students up and help them support them as they start this journey to get the most out of it. At the end of their time at Ohio State, or near the end, there's no fixed timeline for reflection. This course, again, 1 hour seminar, that is exactly what it's called, metacognitive reflection. Take time to look back on and think about and reflect on the experiences that you've had. How did they impact you? What surprised you? You know, what did you have to overcome? What struggles did you face? How did the courses that you took and the experiences that you had, how did that shape you and impact your plans and your goals? We also ask students to reflect on their intercultural competence, right? So how did their perspectives shift and change while they were at Ohio State? And then finally, to turn again and think about the future and think about their next steps, their ongoing growth, their ongoing development, their well-being, because these are all important things, that messages that they're hearing while they're here, they don't end when they leave us. We want students to, again, to think about and plan for their future, because reflection is really where the learning happens. So this is like our capstone course for students at the end of their time at Ohio State. So we also introduce an e-portfolio for students. So again, this is something really audacious. These courses are audacious, but this is particularly so because we are introducing all students to what an e-portfolio is. Students they are introduced to this technology in the launch seminar. They complete assignments. All of their assignments are actually things that teach them how to use this particular tool. In our case, we're using PedalPad. And it will also then link to the reflection seminar. And the first thing they'll do in the reflection seminar is import the work that they did in the launch seminar, and then continue to grow and build from there, kind of comparing and thinking about who they were and who they are now. The next slide, we talk about, what we really are introducing here is folio thinking. This is really what we want students to understand and engage in, because again, we want them to be autonomous learners. We want them to be able to have control over their experiences, to take advantage of the opportunity as they're going through and moving through, to think about and reflect on, save the things that are important to them. And again, there's no way that we can ensure a consistent experience between those bookends. Everyone's going to have their own experiences in the gen ed, but this encouraging them to use folio thinking and to think about what they're getting out of these classes themselves as they move through allows them to curate and narrate their own educational experiences, which is really what we want them to be able to do. This is, again, really unique. We have many campuses statewide, with Columbus being our largest campus, our central campus. But this is the same course, the launch seminar primarily. Reflection will eventually be offered on all the campuses that are degree granting, but for now, the launch seminar is the same at every single campus, and it's massive. We had a massive first year, as you can see in a few numbers that I pulled for us. Last year, just with the reflection in our first cohort, we served about 9,500 students. And the course is structured to promote interaction, to promote thoughtful reflection, to encourage students to, be creative and expressive. And so there's small sections. We have 19 students per section. The course is primarily taught face-to-face, but we also offer synchronous and asynchronous online. Again, it's on every campus. In the first year, we had 500 sections of this course, and it was taught by 140 instructors. And a few of them are pictured on the next slide. And Chris was one of those instructors as well in the spring. But when you think about an operation this size and you think about the goals and how are we going to ensure that students are going to have an equitable, a consistent experience, no matter which of these 500 sections they land in, right? It's a big operation, but it takes a few really important elements. The first is we needed to have a standardized, collaboratively authored curriculum. And so again, I mentioned this was a long time in planning and a long time in preparation, but we were able to, pull together these really wonderful multidisciplinary committees. Chris, of course, was central in this process to help us author the curriculum. And so we were able to pull together, it's really a discipline agnostic curriculum. So it's not really situated in any one discipline, which makes it uniquely awesome and also uniquely challenging to teach. So having the standardization, everyone gets sort of a standard set of materials, a standard course LMS section, to work from, but it's also built for accessibility. So it ensures that the course was designed to optimize universal design principles. Second, because we knew that there was not going to be anyone, let's be honest, is anyone ever really the expert in a class that they teach? We all sort of have realms of expertise, but especially in these general education sort of introductory courses, we all have things that we know better than other things. But we knew going into it that the folks who were going to be teaching this class were by nature going to have certain different vantage points on the gen ed and different experiences. So we built from the start positions that had embedded professional development. So that professional development and collaboration were really part of the position from the get-go, because everyone had something to learn, not only about the curriculum, but also from each other. And then we also really needed that integration piece, right? So that integration piece and being able to connect with and integrate across campus. We can't just be a silo, really we are part of the gen ed as a whole. And so we really needed to integrate because it affects so many different aspects of the student experience. We need to have really deep and meaningful integration with our campus partners. And I'll just say a few more words about each of these things, starting with that universal design. So on the next slide, I have a couple of screenshots from the class. So universal design is really the backbone of the course. So it's designed with two core principles. First, the strong semantic structure and organization, so that it's very, very clear. It doesn't rely on, an individual instructor's expertise, or ability to communicate. Everything they need is clear in the course and clearly organized, very standardized. And there's also transparency and alignment built into all the assignments. So Chris yesterday talked about TILT and Winklemas's work. That's underlying all of our assignments. This commitment to transparency and clear alignment with our learning objectives. So everyone gets this course pre-designed, sort of pre-created for them. And they can supplement it and augment it in different ways, but we know that the bones of the course are built for accessibility, which most people really prefer. And this is an enormous, diverse instructor base. We have folks from almost all of our colleges. I think do we have 12 or 14 colleges, Alan? I think we have folks from 12 colleges teaching with us.
There are 14 colleges that offer undergraduate degrees, but some of them are very small.
Yes.
So.
But we have most of them. We have everything from chemistry, comparative studies, you name it, philosophy, lots of folks from engineering. We have folks from nursing, from dentistry, really all over the place. And that has been really the most wonderful part of this for me, is creating this incredibly dynamic, diverse instructor base. And so we drew from our university community because we have, many teaching specialists. So, undergraduate teaching specialists or lecturers, teaching faculty that we were able to call forward into our program. We also have tenure stream faculty who teach the course, and we have professional staff who teach the course, who interact with students in all different kinds of capacity. But everyone is equal in the bookends, right? Because all students experience the GE, in different ways and connect with folks in different ways. And so again, we really wanted to center instructor development and communication in this community of practice model. And so we're structured around small teams that meet frequently with the team lead. And so this is sort of a representation. Everybody brings their own piece of the puzzle. And we have a lot to learn from one another about what that discipline contributes, or what this pedagogy contributes, what the sciences can learn from the humanities, and vice versa. And so this community of practice model allows instructors to meet in a small team with a team lead. So the teams are only about 6 to 8 people. And so there's a lot of communication, a lot of collaboration, a lot of dynamic building of materials that are used actually in the conduct of the class. And then we have, again, that's only one part of it, right? So we can teach this course really well, but we have to work with our key partners. And that's the next slide, or just a few of our key partners, right? So obviously the faculty own the curriculum. So the faculty had to understand what we were doing and be part of and approve the curriculum. But WAC and the libraries were our key partners as well. And so actually there was content that was created by WAC, by the libraries for other purposes, that we were really able to just take and integrate right into this course. And the beauty of that is now every single student at Ohio University is exposed to some of these ideas, whereas before that wasn't necessarily a guarantee. We had to have partners to collaboratively author the materials. We had to have partners in technology working with us, instructional designers to build the course. Folks, our learning management system is Canvas, so we had to have the Canvas team and the folks who specialize in Canvas. We had to work with the registrar to make sure we could actually do this. We could actually offer this. There are enough rooms on campus that would work for us to deliver this course this way. Advisors are so important. They're absolutely critical, because the advising folks, they're the key to explaining things to students. They're the front lines of communication with students. And so we really had to do a lot of work to help support the advisors in understanding this course, and to understand how it's different from other courses students may be taking that are a little bit similar. And I've had to make big partners with human resources, because when you're hiring on this scale and you're trying to create these relationships and bring folks together from so many different units, it's actually just an enormous task. So all of these folks had to come together, and more. I know this isn't even everybody, but this was a whole university-wide process. So, and I do want to go back and reinforce the fact that WAC and Chris were central. Chris was on so many of the committees moving forward in this planning process and this implementation process of the new GE and the design process of the bookends. And so really it was an opportunity for WAC to sort of take advantage of all those seeds that had been sown and all those relationships that had been built. And in fact, many of the folks who ended up teaching with us, I had encountered and met because of the work that they'd been doing with WAC as well. So I'm going to throw it back to Chris to tell you a little bit more about that.
Great, thank you so much. So as I mentioned before, looking back, I realized myself, and I want to also sort of acknowledge Sustainable WAC, the book by Michelle Cox, Jeff Galen, and Dan Melzer, which on the one hand helped me sort of realize how I was a little more strategic than I thought, but also helped me be a lot more intentional. So I'm not going to be explicit at all the steps that they took, but if one, I'd recommend the book, and two, if you're familiar with the book, you might sort of see some of their advice and some of the ways of thinking about looking at an institution pop up. I'm going to talk first about sort of how I see us and our colleagues getting to this point through two lenses. One is strategic partnerships, and one is being prepared with resources, data, and connections to be made. So I'll first start about how we got here, and then I'll move to some tensions I see going into the future, as well as sort of what I'm thinking about as we go forward. So I want to talk a bit about strategic partnerships, and I want to acknowledge the recent article in the 50th anniversary collection based on, Heather here is one of the co-editors, and Ming Feng, Kimberly Harrison and Christine Maturana talking about their partnerships, a perspective on strategic partnerships at Florida International University. And I found their framework really helpful, thinking about relationships that are developed, either invited or that are maybe imposed in some way institutionally. One thing I'll say, at Ohio State, it's very decentralized, so I've never had either the burden or the ability to sort of force relationships, that it's always generally been invited in some way or supportive, whether or not WAC is at the forefront, or if we are using our visibility to support other programs. And that most certainly was the case with all of the core strategic partnerships over the years. So in the legacy curriculum, the core WAC component of the curriculum was a writing intensive kind of course called second level writing, designated 367 or 2367 once we switched to semesters and departments. And as I got started out, that was the low hanging fruit. So I worked very, very closely with people like Missy and a lot of other colleagues in the departments, just learning what they were doing and sort of offering support where it was needed and making connections. So we would often meet, sometimes we held reading groups, sometimes we would just together, talk about strategies for assessment, just making these connections over time. And again, Alan at UCAT, the Teaching and Learning Center, because it was more centralized, it was the core, place for teaching and learning. We collaborated frequently. We co-sponsored workshops over the years. We worked on, course design, and they had a really successful series of course design institutes that from day one we were a part of. I would go in, give up my half an hour pitch of writing to learn related to course development that really sort of gave us visibility on campus and started a lot of these conversations that moved straight into the kinds of things that Alan and Missy were talking about. The online and digital learning group, which has gone through, I'm speaking generally because all of these have changed their names at least half a dozen times over the years. But online and digital learning would always kind of loop us into conversations as they were working with departments or working with instructors on courses to think about, curriculum. So meeting, the instructional designers, building working relationships with them. And if you were at our workshop yesterday with my colleagues from the library, they introduced me to the ACRL framework for thinking about information literacy, beginning all sorts of conversations. We did all sorts of events leading up to the workshop and workshop series that we talked about and demonstrated yesterday in our workshop. One component I'd like to add to what Ming Feng, Kimberly Harrison and Christina Machuana is on the one hand, there are these institutional partnerships and programmatic partnerships that are absolutely valuable and that we absolutely sort of need to pay attention to, that we're working with each other for the benefit of our programs. But I want to add, the bit I want to add to that is, particularly from my experience over the past 18 years, is also sort of to distinguish between the programmatic roles and the people in those roles. Because certainly we supported each other's programs, but we also made sure that we were supporting each other, and that over time, those people's roles shifted, new people came into their roles. We would always used to joke very briefly when someone stepped into a new role, we would call them, the new so-and-so, the new Marge Lind and comparative studies. And that Marge Lind became, Elizabeth Vu, who became her own thing and did really great things, and now also is in a new position that I'll talk about in a minute. So building those personal relationships were really important as well. Writing letters of support for programmatic components. When people were doing annual reviews, I would often write letters in support, as they would for me as well. Sometimes I would have the pleasure of writing letters for awards, which have been humbly experienced just this year myself, seeing the letters that people wrote in support of me and the programming and the collaboration that we've done over the years. And I think most importantly, looping each other into conversations as we see them, to the point where, you know, in these conversations with the GE, I was sitting at the table with people whose collaboration I valued so much, and who were having these conversations that we had already been having for many, many years, if not decades by that point. So thinking about the shifting programmatic, so I've already talked about how Alan and Missy moved into the Office of Undergraduate Education, particularly in the General Education Office. Many colleagues who I was working with in second level writing moved into college level offices. Elizabeth Vu, for example, who I noted a couple of years ago, became the head of the Arts and Sciences online and distance education. So again, we have a built-in relationship talking about that. Another colleague who taught one of the second level writing courses in the College of Agriculture, Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences became one of the associate deans in charge of assessment. So when I wanted to sort of see what was happening in the College of Agriculture, I would go talk with her. We would have conversations and to be able to connect us to other things. So these kinds of networks and conversations just were really valuable, both for WAC, personally or programmatically, but also to these larger conversations in building something large like a general education. So thinking also about, developing strategic resources program and data collection. One of the things that I did over the years was write local white papers on surveys that we had done of instructors in second level writing on department level instructional support, as well as collecting, for example, course documents and doing studies of what was happening in these courses and making recommendations, connecting to the great scholarship in the field to sort of say, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities in the curriculum as we think about it. And the other development over the past 6 years as well, before the general education began to sort of ramp up, was the now Drake Institute for Teaching and Learning, formerly UCAT, created something kind of a micro-credentialing called endorsements, where instructors could participate in teaching development of about 9 to 12 hours of work, and then have recognized credit, some of which could also be leveraged into what they called instructional redesign, which involved putting together portfolio of teaching development and assessment, which would actually potentially lead to raises of their salaries for faculty. So as that developed, I made sure that we had developed a seminar, a WAC seminar we had tried over years. It was never really particularly sustainable. But now, after working over the years, seeing the Course Design Institute and adapting some things that made that sustainable, latching on to the endorsements as a way of incentivizing, we created Teaching Through Writing, and collaborating with the university libraries for the Meaningful Inquiry Seminar, which we workshopped yesterday. And the other thing that developed, over the pandemic, as different of our colleagues doing teaching development were really rapidly trying to put out resources for instructors to move online and develop hybrid courses eventually, as well as to sort of pull together legacy teaching resources. We all gathered together to create what's called the Teaching and Learning Resource Center, where we were able to develop a whole series of resources online that instructors could point to and that we could guide instructors towards. So for example, the WAC program developed Teaching Students to Write Across the Disciplines, which I based actually on some of the documents that we had put together in the implementation stage that actually weren't incidentally picked up. So I moved them and repurposed them so that we could still use them as a way of guiding faculty as they were thinking about writing in their disciplines, particularly as they were thinking about the embedded literacy component for advanced writing. And recently we collaborated together to do one on AI considerations for teaching and learning. We also, those faculty-facing resources, we've also developed student-facing resources like a module on our Canvas iteration on academic integrity in writing across the disciplines. So a kind of a genre approach analysis guiding students, making use of published scholarship as well as some samples of student writing and assignments that instructors across the curriculum had shared with us and that we have shared. And one of the surprises that came up that I had no idea how that was being used over time until I was teaching launch seminar last semester, and I was thinking, oh, I should grab one of those videos and show them in class and we can do an exercise. So then I actually looked at what the students were doing in Carmen or in the LMS, and they were actually looking at the exact videos I was prepared to share. So it was already incorporated into the curriculum that students were using. I had also developed with the online learning folks for one of the online programs they were working with, a video about peer review and recommendations for giving and receiving feedback, and that also was incorporated into both launch and reflection seminar. So having these resources available, being able to sort of see what the needs of the campus was around and being prepared with these resources, collecting data were really crucial. But as we sort of look at where we're headed in the curriculum, I'm seeing some tensions. And one of the metaphors that I find myself using a lot right now is that I'm a jazz person, so forgive me if I lay into a couple of jazz metaphors. So I'm going to talk in jazz and in music in general. Tension isn't necessarily bad. It can be bad, but tensions in music hopefully lead somewhere. They might lead to resolve into a place that you might expect it. It might resolve into something unexpected, which can be really delightful. But sometimes tension in itself can be beautiful. So and again, learning over the years that you can't always resolve the tension in a way that you expect or want it, but sometimes you make some discoveries that you didn't expect before. So here are the key tensions that I sort of see, and then that'll lead to sort of where I'm thinking in terms of the strategic partnerships and the kinds of resources that I'm looking to develop in the coming years. And also maybe ask some questions maybe that you could help me sort of think through and along with Alan and Missy. So the first one, and for me, sort of the most standing one, that's both, I think, curricular and pedagogical, are deficit mindsets to learning writing. What are students learning in their first year writing courses or in their writing now, the writing and information literacy courses? Why can't we guarantee that students get everything that we need? Thanks to the, wonderful blossoming of scholarship on transfer of learning, I think there's a lot of new ways of thinking about that I feel I'm really thinking about how can we use this change in curriculum to introduce the concept of teaching for transfer, but also sort of thinking about transfer from an equity mindset. So what kinds of assets are students bringing to their learning? How can we use writing and think about writing in a way that will help instructors kind of build on that, to use prior knowledge, to use the kind of cultural and linguistic and identities that students are bringing to their work. And as Alan and Missy talked about, our general education, our writing education was very disconnected. They would take first year writing in the English department, a nationally recognized program that did an excellent job over many decades doing that work. They would take this second level writing course, one of about 50 courses in about 30 departments, any of which the students could choose. And then something happened at the department level, which I was never able to figure out. And there was a third level component that sort of I've heard over the years was underfunded and unsupported, even though the faculty sort of really wanted something. So that's something that I'm thinking about. How do we make these connections? How do we think, help faculty and departments think more vertically as well as horizontally about their writing, and I'll also sort of a little bit of spoiler here, connected to all the literacies that they're going to be thinking about through the embedded literacies. Lastly, and I don't see this necessarily as a tension as much as the previous three, but the tension between institutional programmatic assessment, the kinds of work that Alan and our colleague Meg Daly, who's the Dean of Undergraduate Education and General Education, tension between that and the kinds of things that I have learned working with instructors and departments and WPA type folks in the departments about teaching and curriculum development. Again, they're not necessarily in tension, but I think too often they are. So how do you bring those in conversation to each other? So I'm thinking very carefully about those tensions as we go next. So thinking in terms of strategic partnerships, Alan asked me to be part of a general assessment committee that over time is going to look at all of those different components and all of the categories in the GE, build a plan for assessment. So right now, we're in the process this year of working with stakeholders in writing and information literacy, our new component for what had just been first year writing. And so English is now sharing that category with a handful of 7 other departments, all of whom were part of that group teaching 2367. So everybody who I knew immediately when we were asked to put together stakeholders, people I knew who are already doing that work and work that would speak to what was happening in their courses, as well as our great colleagues in English, to really think about a lot of these challenges and with assessing the new GE expected learning outcomes for writing. The other question, thinking about the new embedded literacies, and I've always been admiring, had admiration for my colleagues at Minnesota and the WEC program. And one of the opportunities I potentially see ahead is, what if we thought not just about writing, but all of these other embedded literacies? Because when I was a part of the committee that developed some of the learning outcomes and some of the suggestions or recommendations for that, I didn't see the embedded literacies just embedded in the disciplines, but embedded in each other. So what would WEC Plus look like? Thinking about writing, information literacy, data analysis, and technology among our key partners look like? What if we got all of those key partners together and thought about a process that would work with departments to in a WEC-like manner to sort of help them do the kinds of curricular planning that Minnesota and other institutions are doing? What would that look like? Developing, literacy plans across the departments. I've been working with a very small department in nursing called Health and Wellness, which does a lot of health coaching, both in and of itself, but also incorporated into different, healthcare providers. And just simply talking with them already, I see all sorts of connections and ways of looping in my colleagues to have these conversations. For example, they do a lot of annotated bibliographies, and the common bottleneck that they see in those is that students know how formally and structurally how to do an annotated bibliography, but they get really stuck because of the range of kinds of sources that they bring to the table, how interdisciplinarity, the kinds of questions that they're asking, and the kinds of data and resources from these disciplines that they have to bring to these, in very complex ways. So how can we help them do that work more effectively as they look at their wider curriculum? And the last question in terms of strategic partnerships is, as I've been doing this work, a lot of the, picking up workshops, one-off workshops, or doing all of these different programming, as I'm being asked to sort of be part of these conversations as we think about, moving to the department level. And this is the same conversation I'm having with my colleagues in teaching and learning centers across campus. If we're going to have impact, maybe we're going to get more bang for the buck at the department level. But that also means we're not going to have the capacity to do the individual work that we were doing before. So how do we think about moving towards that department level? What may we have to stop doing that we were doing before? And that's to be seen. So thinking about strategic resources, programming, and data, I'm currently over the summer working on collecting the embedded literacy plans, which were published by the Committee on Academic Affairs, that all of the departments. So this was the thing I was really excited about when we wrote the embedded literacies proposal, that the departments would have to put their cards on the table about where writing was happening in their majors. And as you can imagine, it's across the board, and I'm not ready to share any particular conclusions from that white paper, but it will sort of give us a picture of where writing is, a very thin picture, because all the departments are doing at this point are talking about which courses are meeting which learning outcomes. And some departments have mapped that out in very explicit ways. Some are not very clear at all. So, but that also points to further data that we can collect and research that we can do to sort of push this conversation forward. And the other one, and we've been thinking and talking about this in writing and information literacy, is building a context for the assessment of writing. And one of the things that has become the case, as it is, I'm sure, with many of your institutions, is that a lot of students are coming in with credit for first-year writing. And last time that I was able to look at that data, probably 5 or 6 years ago with my colleagues in the Department of English, over 50% of students coming to the Columbus campus were coming already with credit with first-year writing. And in this conversation about building the new GE and thinking about the embedded literacies, we really have to have a conversation about that and to talk with the departments. So being able to sort of collect that data, look at that data in the background, and to think about, what does that mean to how we're, going to build and support that curriculum going forward, both at the, writing and foundational level and in the departments. And one of the things I've been talking with Missy about launch curriculum, she does a number of surveys asking students to talk about their prior experiences, what kinds of learning are they bringing in related to the curriculum. One of the things that I'd like to do is to ask students, what are their prior experiences with writing? Are they bringing in, that credit from elsewhere? What are some things that we can ask them that might sort of reflect in some way about maybe their own efficacy related to the learning outcomes that we've articulated for first-year writing, and to be able to share that with the rest of the university to sort of say, look, your students are coming out with a range of experiences. That has always been the case, but you need to pay attention to that now as we think about your curriculum going forward. And also sort of thinking about how we build further resources to support instructors across the departments. The committee that I'm working with for writing and information literacy, we're building an assessment guide because we can't create a generalized rubric because one, we know that generally is a bad idea. One, and two, because the ELOs are written in a way that are very contextualized and rhetorical, which is great. But that also means that we have to sort of help instructors doing that assessment to sort of think very carefully about how they situate it and collect as much contextual data about that assessment so that we can sort of see and maybe make some comparisons. So on the one hand, Alan and Meg at the programmatic level can sort of have some sense of how development and the learning outcomes are happening, but also, as I was saying earlier, give local WPAs and instructors what they need to build refined curriculum and to develop teaching. We're also talking about developing farther range of materials to help stakeholders think about the teaching of writing, give them the skills and ideas that they need. And then thinking about supporting an integrative curriculum. One of the things that Missy, Alan, and our colleagues and I have talking about, we can have the bookends, but if the students don't find books to put up on the shelf, how are they going to make those connections? Because the bookends are extraordinarily well designed to give them those iterative skills. But if the people, the faculty teaching the themes and the foundations aren't building and see the value of that, it's not going to be as valuable for the students or for the larger curriculum in the end. So, talking more and introducing e-portfolios and the kinds of reflective activity and the value of that, not just in the bookends, but in the wider curriculum to promote that and to encourage faculty to give students that opportunity, to give students to think integratively about the kind of wider experiences they're having outside of the curriculum as well, and to get them excited about that. Both the students and the faculty. And lastly, we have last week I was in Chicago with a colleague from Learning Technology who's developing some resources related to Adobe Creative Suite. We've developed a relationship and building some programming around that. And I was able to talk about sort of the opportunities for creative expression that could make use of Adobe Creative, but could also sort of develop a conversation across the curriculum about multimodal composition and thinking more broadly about the kinds of writing and composing that's happening. So thinking about all of these connections and, both in terms of the relationships that we've developed, the kinds of resources that are building, and really sort of thinking about the kinds of communication to make sure that this new curriculum can grow and mature in the ways that we hope, and to really sort of see what can evolve, what kind of fruit can evolve from what the students produce. Missy or Alan, do you have anything to add and before we go to questions? No, great. So that's my overview. We're not going to do a think, pair, share because I don't think we have any particular time. But I would love to sort of hear your questions for any of us, or thoughts or suggestions. Because again, yes. Yeah.
So my question is for you that you are wonder, and you also mentioned at the end the integration of you went to the reading courses and understand a little bit about it in the majors. And so do the majors use the portfolio as well, or is it just the bookends and then the themes that and the gen ed?
I think Alan could probably answer that question. The short answer is the way that the back end is set up at this point, as far as sort of programmatic assessment, really only for the GE. We haven't gotten to the point where it can be used for programmatic assessment necessarily in departments, but students can use it to share links out to some representation of a portfolio that they put together for a class. But getting all of the kinds of information that we're looking at the department level. I don't want to. Alan can sort of explain that better than
Chris,
I
could you revoice the question? I only heard tiny bits of it.
Oh, okay, yeah. I have to remember that because I can hear you. They can't. So the question was, thinking about the e-portfolio, how does that work in terms outside of the bookends? Can it be used in sort of, say, department or theme level courses? Is that a good rephrasing of your, okay.
So we just started using it this year, so it is slowly scaling up, and we don't have the back end support for programmatic design at scale yet. So any instructor can tell students, you have access to that portfolio and you probably want to save this kind of assignment to look back at it. And even they could design an assignment where they ask students to post something there and reflect on it. But the way PebblePad works is that there is a separate tool for designing what do they call workbooks, which are more intensive, directed uses of the tool rather than personal uses. We have those for the bookends. The next group to get that is going to be our honors college, because they've contributed some finances to do that. And then as we have bandwidth, other departments and programs that want to do programmatic level portfolios could get the support to do that. But the main thing is that we want the students to own these portfolios. This is the students' work, and we want them to be able to pick and choose and curate what they care about and share that with the people they want to share it with. And that learning how to do that is part of the curriculum, particularly in the reflection seminar. And it looks like Missy's ready to tell you about that, so I'll shut up.
No, I just wanted to add
Oh,
to
wait.
that, if I can just add to that, the university engaged with an e-portfolio for the bookend courses, but it just is fortunate that we are able to use it as an enterprise tool. And so everyone at the university who can log into our university system has access to the resource and can do whatever they want to do with that resource as it exists. So I think we're just really at the very beginning of our institutional use of an e-portfolio tool. The previous programs that have used e-portfolios have been doing it with like a completely different thing that wasn't even really for e-portfolios. And so, I think this is really just Ohio State's first step in using e-portfolio technologies and pedagogies. I think it's going to be quite a while before it matures and ripens.
Mm-hmm. And this is definitely a place where that institutional, and something I've definitely learned from reading Kathy's work, the institutional and programmatic assessment is often in tension, with the kinds of portfolio pedagogies that happen in the classroom. It's not unresolvable, but it's hard to kind of reconcile. And this is where one of those tension is. But you said you wanted to follow. Oh, the question is, how long will students have access to their work after they graduate?
As long as Ohio State maintains our contract with PebblePad, all of our graduates will maintain full access to their accounts. Should Ohio State move on, individuals can purchase their own accounts, and I think currently it's $60 a year for full access, which is not trivial, but it's not expensive at all either. So it looks like forever, or at least until we go to another tool.
Yeah.
So I admire the design of and it addresses. I think the challenge is that increasingly, and I'm at an institute that's not online on that, but where students increasingly think of their education in bits and pieces, they want to come and go, I don't think many students think of this as a solid 4-year enterprise as they did when I began.
Mm-hmm.
How does that factor into this?
Yeah. So the question is, students, particularly these days, aren't necessarily inclined, even when the curriculum is designed to be integrative, to want to be able to do this. And, I can sort of say, after teaching launch seminar for the first time, that it most definitely is a hard sell. And I think in the long run, it's really going to depend on, again, as I was saying, giving opportunities for students to put books on the shelf, to be able to reiterate and continue to train them and give them opportunities to do this reflective practice, to sort of over time see the value of this kind of reflective and integrative thinking. But that's my answer to the question. I'll let Missy or Alan to give their perspective.
Well, I can say yes. It's a big culture shift. It's first of all a very different pedagogy that we're using in the bookends, right? So it's not a content-based class. It's very much like an experiential class. It's very self-reflective, and students are not accustomed to that. They're expecting your traditional content-based college courses. And so I think part of it is we have to establish the value of this type of class for students and for really the university community. And then also it really is going to take a while to build for those roots to spread about the value of this kind of pedagogy. And also, to help instructors also think about what artifacts are students creating in their courses that are appropriate for them to save in an e-portfolio. If you just have a bunch of multiple choice exams, what is there for students to put into an e-portfolio, right? So I do think that we have a lot of opportunity ahead of us, but this new GE is a big culture change for Ohio State. And so it's going to be slow moving, but students, we're starting with the students. We're trying to help engender in them this understanding and appreciation for reflection and, kind of intentionality in the choices that they make and the learning experiences that they have. And I think over time, as we see more examples of students embracing that will also go a long way to helping students understand. But like I said, we've just had our first year, so ask that question again in a couple more IWACs.
But I mean, I think in some sense it's countercultural too, if we think about college education as credentialing in whatever area. My suggestion already addressed that question. And then the other is what happens when students crash and burn? What happens with alarming frequency?
Okay, so yeah, a couple of comments there. One about that kind of reflective thinking being in tension with credentialization, and then students just really burning out, particularly early on in their careers. And Missy, I know you have an answer to that, because that was something that was really actually very moving about teaching launch seminar, is the extent to which we're giving space for students to sort of find their ground. And a lot of them did articulate, just coming out of the pandemic, being in college for the first time, really feeling burned out. And then I sort of felt free in that context, and in the wonderful curriculum that we've built, to sort of give them space to sort of begin to try to find their footing.
Yeah, I can also say part of what the messaging that we've built in is to normalize and embrace, missteps and failure. We have a series of videos that were created in collaboration with folks from around the university, talking about how they found their academic identity and how it's not a straight path from point A to point B. People changed direction. People had one intention when they came to university, and then it totally changed after some experiences that they had. And so those videos are built into the curriculum to help students. Really, we want them to have a healthy mindset. We want them to have a healthy approach to this, and to also know what resources there are. We're building digital wellness into the curriculum moving forward. The reflection seminar will have a focus on we have 8 dimensions of wellness, that our university addresses in the student experience. And so we'll be reflecting on incorporating those into reflection. So yeah, it is. I think that's also why I think students are kind of shocked. They're like, well, I don't have a whole bunch of things to memorize or learn in this class. That's just a different kind of pedagogy. But again, I think our goal is for students to have a sense of efficacy and a sense of autonomy, and also just a sense of optimism in the experiences that they have.
It's also the case that that is the intention of the themes, is to show, to enact that the big problems in the world, the things that people find really interesting and necessary to work on, are multidisciplinary, that you have to integrate across ways of thinking to make sense of them. And that's part of the learning outcomes built into those classes. And as we get more and more courses proposed and built for those, we are hopeful that students will get to learn about and engage with that at that level of the gen ed. But again, come back in a couple of years and we'll let you know how that worked.
Yeah, that's a great thing to end on because we're at time. So thank you for joining us. We have our contact here, and we'd love to sort of hear from you if you have some thoughts, if you're interested in learning more. And again, we look forward to sharing more over the next few years as this new curriculum develops. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. This was fun. Take care, all.
Thanks for that.